during that time, I found that this woman is nothing short of a monster. And this is the exact dimensions of the box in which she was killed.
September 10th, 2024, Rose Hill, Kansas. A quiet suburban neighborhood where families raise their children, where neighbors wave to each other, where life seems normal. On this evening, dispatchers receive a call about a mental health crisis. Officers respond to a home on North Meeker Court, just another Tuesday night call in a small Kansas town. But when officers arrive and begin speaking with the homeowner, 50-year-old Christina Schroer, something doesn't sit right. Her words are haunting. Within hours, this routine welfare check would uncover one of the most disturbing child murder cases in Kansas history. A case that would expose not just one woman's evil, but the catastrophic failures of an entire system meant to protect the most vulnerable among us. This is the story of Natalie Garcia. The morning of September 11th, 2024, Rose Hill police secure a search warrant for the Schroer property. What Christina told them the night before has led them to believe something unthinkable might be buried here. Cadaver dogs are brought in from Sedgwick County Emergency Management. They alert multiple times in the overgrown backyard. Investigators begin a careful, methodical excavation. 23 inches below the surface, they find it. A black plastic trash bag, carefully tied in a knot. Inside that bag, another bag, double wrapped. Inside are the decomposed remains of a child. Questions flood the investigation. Who is this child? How long have they been here? What happened in this house? The remains are transported to the Sedgwick County Forensic Science Center. Due to advanced decomposition, visual identification is impossible. DNA samples are collected. On September 27, 2024, 16 days after discovery, the results come back. The victim has been identified. Her name was Natalie Marie Garcia. She was 6 years old. Before we go any further into this story, before we discuss the horror of what happened, we need to know who Natalie was. Because she was not just a victim, she was a child, a sister, a daughter, a little girl who deserved so much more than the life she was given. Natalie Marie Garcia was born on July 14, 2014, at 11:06 in the morning in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her biological mother, Krista Helm, would later describe her daughter with words that painted a picture of pure joy. An infectious smile, a joy to be around. At 6 years old, Natalie should have been losing her first tooth, learning to read, playing with friends, discovering the world. Instead, Natalie's life would be cut tragically short. But here's what makes this case even more haunting. The medical examiner determined that Natalie died in November of 2020. Let that sink in for a moment. Her body was found in September 2024. That means for nearly 4 years, 400 days, a little girl's body lay buried in a backyard while the people responsible went on living their lives. For 4 years, someone kept this secret. For 4 years, Natalie's biological family had no idea what had happened to their daughter, their sister, their granddaughter. For 4 years, the other children in that house knew something terrible had occurred and were powerless to stop it or speak about it. This is Natalie's story. It's a story about evil hiding in plain sight, about systems that failed, about red flags that were missed. But most importantly, it's about seeking justice for a voiceless child. To understand how this tragedy occurred, we need to understand the people responsible. Meet Christina Elizabeth Schroer, 50 years old, a stay-at-home mother who appeared to dedicate her life to caring for children. Her husband, Joseph Shane Schroer, was 53, a retired United States Air Force veteran who served his country honorably for over 20 years before working as a mechanic. On paper, the Schroers looked like model citizens. They presented themselves as devout Christians, active in their community, and passionate about helping children in need. They had 4 biological children of their own, and they opened their home to foster children, kids who had experienced trauma and needed stability, safety, and love. To their neighbors, to their extended family, to social workers who visited, the Schroers appeared to be exactly what the foster care system desperately needs: caring, stable, committed parents willing to take in children that others wouldn't. But behind closed doors, inside that house on North Meeker Court, a nightmare was unfolding. What investigators would eventually uncover was not a loving home, but a carefully constructed prison, a place where vulnerable children were systematically isolated, controlled, and harmed, where technology was weaponized, where basic human needs became tools of manipulation. This was not a home. This was a house of horrors, hidden behind a perfect facade. In August 2017, 3-year-old Natalie and her 2 biological sisters, ages 4 years and 9 months, were removed from their biological parents' care and placed into the Kansas foster care system. This is a moment of trauma for any child, being separated from everything familiar. The girls were placed with Joseph and Christina Schroer through St. Francis Ministries, at the time, the largest foster care provider in Kansas. The Schroers already had experience with fostering and adoption. They seemed like a perfect match. For over 2 years, the girls lived with the Schroers as foster children. According to records, they appeared to be adjusting. Natalie and her eldest sister were receiving mental health services, therapy to help them process their trauma. They attended school. There were regular check-ins with caseworkers. In November 2019, after their biological parents relinquished parental rights, the adoption was finalized. Natalie and her 2 sisters, along with 2 other girls, were officially adopted by the Schroers. 5 girls total, ranging in age from 1.5 to 6 years old. Christina immediately changed Natalie's name. Natalie Marie Garcia became Kennedy Jean Schroer. For the purposes of this video, we'll continue to call her Natalie, the name her biological mother gave her, the name that honors who she really was. The moment those adoption papers were signed, everything changed. Red flag number 1. Within weeks of the adoption being finalized, Christina removed both Natalie and her eldest sister from mental health services. These children had been receiving therapy for months, processing trauma, building coping skills. That support vanished overnight. Red flag number 2. In January 2020, just 2 months after adoption, Christina withdrew all the children from school, all of them. Suddenly, these girls who had been attending public school, who had teachers and counselors and mandated reporters around them every day, were completely isolated at home. Christina told family and friends that the girls had been expelled for disturbing behavior, eating trash, being physically destructive, creating chaos. But when investigators later reviewed school records, they found no documentation of any such behavior. No incident reports, no disciplinary actions, no complaints from teachers. What they found instead was a single note: Christina withdrawing the children from school, allegedly on a doctor's orders. No such doctor's order existed. Then came COVID-19, and Christina had the perfect cover story for homeschooling, protecting an immunocompromised person in the household. It sounded responsible. It sounded caring. It was completely fabricated. What was really happening was isolation, complete and total isolation of vulnerable children from anyone who might notice something was wrong. Inside the Schroer home, Christina was building something sinister, a total surveillance state. She installed security cameras throughout the entire house, interior and exterior. These weren't normal home security cameras monitoring doors and windows. These cameras were focused on the children, specifically the 4 eldest adopted girls. The cameras were connected to Christina's smartphone, sending her text messages and push notifications for any movement detected, any movement at all. If one of the girls moved her hand while sleeping, an alert would go off. If a child shifted position in bed, Christina's phone would notify her. If they played with their hair, adjusted a blanket, wiggled their feet, the cameras captured it, and Christina's rage would follow. This level of monitoring is not normal parenting. This is not keeping children safe. This is pathological control. Investigators would later describe it as a system designed to ensure the children lived in constant fear, never knowing when they might be punished for the simple act of moving. The control extended beyond surveillance. Christina controlled every aspect of the household finances. Joseph, a military veteran with his own income, was given just $200 from each of his paychecks as an allowance. Christina kept the rest, including all the foster care and adoption reimbursement payments, which were substantial for 5 children. Child psychologists said, "What we're seeing described here are classic isolation tactics used by abusers. Remove the children from school. You eliminate teachers, counselors, other adults who might notice injuries or behavioral changes. Cut off therapy. You eliminate mental health professionals who are trained to spot abuse. Install surveillance. You create an environment where children know they're always being watched, always under threat. This isn't parenting. This is captivity." By early 2020, less than 3 months after adoption, those 5 little girls were living in a prison. Cut off from school, from therapy, from extended family, from any outside contact that wasn't carefully controlled by Christina. And the abuse, systematic, escalating, methodical abuse, was just beginning. What happened inside that house was not discipline. It was torture, systematic, calculated, and escalating. Christina developed what can only be described as a punishment ladder, where each level became more severe, more cruel, more dehumanizing. Level 1, forced immobility. If a child moved during the night, something captured by Christina's cameras, they would be forced to lie face down on their bed without moving for extended periods. A second offense meant lying face down on the floor instead. Think about that for a moment. A child lying motionless, not allowed to shift position, scratch an itch, adjust for comfort, just lying there in fear, knowing that any movement might make things worse. Level 2, confinement in basement closets. Children were forced to sleep in these closets day and night, with nothing but a bucket to use as a toilet, no bed, no comfort, no dignity, just darkness and isolation. Level 3, dog crates. Yes, you heard that correctly. Christina would force children to spend nights locked in dog crates, containers designed for animals, not human beings. To prevent the children from moving or making noise, she would force them to take medications. Level 4, the boxes, reinforced cardboard boxes and hard plastic storage containers. According to survivor testimony, children were locked inside these containers and told they had to remain completely silent and motionless for 10 minutes to be released. One of the girls later told investigators it was hot and sweaty inside the boxes. Another drew pictures during the investigation showing the containers and how the bottom of the storage container lids had sharp points that would press into them. Investigators found a heartbreaking plea written by one of the children. "Please do not make us get in the boxes." But Christina didn't stop. The boxes became her preferred method of punishment, and eventually one of those boxes would become a little girl's coffin. The confinement was only part of the horror. Christina employed multiple forms of abuse simultaneously, creating an environment where these children existed in constant survival mode. Physical abuse was routine. Survivors reported being struck with Christina's hands, with clothes hangers, with whatever object was nearby. One child was hung by her wrists in a closet. Another was threatened with knives. But perhaps most insidious was the food deprivation. Christina controlled every meal, often feeding the adopted children moldy bread, food that had been stepped on, or providing so few calories that the children's growth was stunted. One child arrived at the Schroer home in 2017 at a healthy 75th percentile for weight. By the time she was removed in 2024, she had dropped below the 5th percentile. That's 7 years of systematic starvation, interrupted only briefly when the children were allowed to attend school and could eat lunch there. The other adopted children showed similar patterns. Their bodies tell a story of chronic malnutrition, a story of children being deliberately denied one of the most basic human needs. The psychological abuse was equally calculated. Christina would pit the sisters against each other, rewarding children who told on their siblings, punishing the group for one child's perceived infractions. She would lavish attention on the youngest child while shunning the others, constantly shifting who was in favor and who was the target. This created an environment where sisters couldn't trust each other, where alliances shifted daily, where survival meant sometimes betraying the people you loved most. It was psychological warfare waged against children. Why would someone do this? Why would Christina Schroer adopt 5 vulnerable children only to subject them to systematic torture? Investigators discovered a disturbing answer: money. Christina had a severe gambling addiction. Police found records showing she had gambled away over $4 million at a single casino, 7 Clans First Council Casino Hotel. Her lifetime totals showed $4.2 million in coin-in, meaning money played through slot machines, including both losses and winnings that were immediately gambled again. To fund this addiction, Christina engaged in systematic fraud. She falsely reported that the children had severe behavioral and medical conditions to increase the per diem payments she received from the state. More diagnoses meant higher reimbursement rates. The children weren't patients in need of care, they were profit centers. Even after Natalie died in November 2020, Christina continued to collect benefits in her name. For 4 years, she fraudulently received approximately $23,000 in payments for a child who was buried in her backyard. Butler County Attorney Darren Deviney would later say, "The children were treated as items on a ledger, either bringing income in or taking income away." Witnesses told police that Christina's gambling created constant financial strain. She was always shuffling money between accounts, her bank accounts were frequently locked due to suspected fraud, and bankruptcy papers were found during the search of the home. The irony is devastating. Money meant to provide food, clothing, medical care, and stability for traumatized children was instead being funneled into slot machines, while those same children were being starved and tortured. This wasn't a case of a parent losing control or struggling with mental illness. This was calculated exploitation. Christina Schroer knew exactly what she was doing, and she was profiting from it. Halloween 2020 was the last time anyone outside the Schroer home saw Natalie alive. She was 6 years old. Within days, she would be dead. During the night following Halloween, Natalie moved in her bed, just shifted position while sleeping, something every human being does naturally, unconsciously. But in the Schroer house, this simple act was a punishable offense. The motion-detecting camera in the bedroom sent an alert to Christina's phone. According to investigators and survivor testimony, Christina was angrier than usual that night. She forced 6-year-old Natalie into a reinforced cardboard box. The dimensions: 16.5 inches wide, 14 inches long, 12.5 inches high. To put that in perspective, that's smaller than the standard box you'd receive in a large Amazon delivery. The average 6-year-old is between 42 and 49 inches tall. Natalie would have to be completely curled up, unable to move, unable to stretch, unable to do anything but fit her small body into that tiny space. But Christina wasn't finished. She began piling heavy blankets on top of the box. Then she added more objects, eventually placing a baby crib on top of the entire stack. Each item added weight, pressure, and heat. Each item reduced the already minimal airflow into that tiny box. She began piling heavy blankets on top of the box. Then she added more objects, eventually placing a baby crib on top of the entire stack. Each item added weight, pressure, and heat. Each item reduced the already minimal airflow into that tiny box. When a person is confined in a small space with limited airflow, carbon dioxide builds up rapidly. The oxygen gets depleted, the temperature rises. It's hot, it's airless, and as you breathe, every breath makes it worse. This is how suffocation occurs, not dramatically, but gradually, terrifyingly. And Natalie wasn't alone in that room. One of Natalie's sisters was forced to remain in the room. Christina made her sit there and watch the box, reporting back every few minutes whether Natalie was being quiet and motionless. Can you imagine? Being a child yourself, watching your little sister trapped in a box, hearing her breathing become more labored, knowing something terrible is happening, and being powerless to stop it. According to court documents, as time passed, the sister became increasingly distressed. She told Christina she thought Natalie might be dead. Christina's response was to kick the box. When she removed the obstacles on top and opened the box, Natalie's small body fell out. She was limp. She was blue. She was gone. Natalie Marie Garcia died from suffocation. She was 6 years old. The medical examiner would later classify her death as a homicide. What happened next reveals the true nature of Christina Schroer's character. She didn't call 911. She didn't seek help. She didn't attempt to save this child or take responsibility for what she'd done. Instead, according to her later statements to police, she wrapped Natalie's body in a sheet, placed it in her car, and drove around for hours. Hours. Driving through Rose Hill with a dead child in her vehicle, deciding what to do. When she returned home, she double-bagged Natalie's body in black plastic trash bags. She dug a hole in the backyard, right outside the master bedroom window, and she buried her. That master bedroom, where Christina and Joseph would sleep for the next 4 years, was mere feet from where they'd buried this little girl. Investigators would later note the chilling reality. They continued their lives, sleeping in that room, looking out that window for 400 nights, knowing exactly what lay beneath the ground. And then came the lie. Christina told her family, told Joseph's relatives, told the other children that Natalie had been taken back by the state. She claimed Natalie had attacked a younger sibling and was placed in psychiatric care. She said they couldn't visit, couldn't call, couldn't have contact. Some family members thought it was strange, but Christina was convincing. She always had an explanation. She always had an answer. And Natalie remained buried in that backyard, silent, while the world moved on. For 4 years, Christina Schroer maintained an elaborate fiction. She was, by all accounts, a master manipulator, someone who could look you in the eye and lie without a flicker of conscience. To extended family, she was the overwhelmed but dedicated foster mother dealing with troubled children. To friends, she was a pillar of the community. To the surviving children in her home, she was their absolute controller, someone who had proven she was capable of the ultimate act and would not hesitate to do it again. The other children in the house lived with this knowledge. They knew what happened to Natalie, they knew where she was buried, and they knew that speaking about it meant potentially sharing her fate. Chillingly, the abuse of the surviving children actually intensified after Natalie's death. The boxes continued to be used as punishment. The starvation continued. The confinement continued. If anything, Christina's control became more absolute, her cruelty more pronounced. She had crossed the line from abuser to killer, and she showed no signs of remorse or restraint. In 2021, a year after Natalie's death, one of the adopted children ran away from the Schroer home. When police found her, she tried to tell them about the abuse. She tried to explain what was happening in that house. Officers investigated. They interviewed people. They looked into the allegations. But Christina was prepared. She had answers for everything. She had explanations. She could point to the cameras as evidence of a secure home. She could present as the concerned parent dealing with difficult children. The investigation was unable to substantiate the claims. The girl was returned to the home, and the abuse continued. Rose Hill Police would later issue a statement acknowledging, "We, law enforcement, were fooled by the facade Christina had created. We hope we can learn through the failures found in this investigation about what to look for and how to take action." By the time of this attempted report in 2021, Natalie had already been dead for months, but the other children were still suffering. This was a chance to save them, a chance that was missed. How many red flags have to be waved before someone sees them? In late August 2024, the Kansas Department for Children and Families received an anonymous report. The details were alarming. There had been an incident at the Schroer home involving one sister harming another sister, potentially fatally. A caseworker contacted Christina by phone. Once again, Christina had explanations. Once again, she was convincing. The caseworker closed the case without ever seeing the children in person, without verifying their safety, without checking if all the adopted children were even still alive. Unbeknownst to Christina, she had dodged a bullet. The investigation was over, or so she thought. But on September 10, 2024, just weeks later, everything fell apart. Christina took an overdose of pills in what appeared to be a suicide attempt. When first responders arrived, she was distraught, repeating variations of the same phrase, "My life is over. No one will ever look at me the same." As officers began asking questions about her mental state and what had caused this crisis, Christina started talking. She volunteered information about a child who had died years ago. She initially claimed that one of the other children was responsible, that another girl had put Natalie in the box, but police were skeptical. They requested to interview the children separately. One of Natalie's sisters was brought in for questioning. Initially, she stuck to the story she'd been told to tell, the version where she was somehow responsible for her sister's death. But then investigators took a break. The girl remained in the room with her father, Joseph. What they didn't realize was that the recording equipment was still running. On tape, the girl told her father what really happened, how Christina had forced Natalie into the box, how she had piled objects on top, how Natalie had stopped moving and turned blue, how their mother had driven away with the body and returned without Natalie. When investigators heard this recording, they knew they had the truth. The next morning, September 11, 2024, the excavation began. Within hours, Natalie's remains were found, exactly where the sister said they would be. 4 years of lies, 4 years of cover-up, 4 years of other children living in terror. It was finally over. On February 3, 2025, nearly 5 months after Natalie's remains were discovered, authorities arrested both Christina and Joseph Schroer. The delay was intentional. Investigators wanted to build an airtight case, documenting every piece of evidence, interviewing every witness. Christina was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, 4 counts of child abuse and torture, felony theft, forgery, Medicaid fraud, and desecration of a corpse. Joseph was charged with aggravated child endangerment and Medicaid fraud. While he wasn't accused of directly killing Natalie, investigators found text message evidence showing he knew about some of the abuse, including discussions about putting children in dog kennels and providing buckets and closets for them to use as toilets. The evidence against Christina was overwhelming. Survivor testimony, physical evidence, financial records, surveillance footage she herself had recorded, everything pointed to years of systematic abuse culminating in murder. But Christina Schroer didn't operate in a vacuum. She was enabled by a foster care system that was itself in crisis. Natalie was placed with the Schroers through St. Francis Ministries, and while no organization can prevent every tragedy, the condition of St. Francis at the time raises serious questions about oversight and accountability. Here's what was happening at St. Francis while children like Natalie were in their care. In November 2019, the same month Natalie was adopted, a whistleblower inside St. Francis reported massive financial mismanagement. The organization's CEO, Robert Father Bobby Smith, was hiding financial losses from the board of directors. In November 2020, the same month Natalie died, Smith resigned after an investigation revealed he had funneled $7 million to a business partner for software that was never completed, purchased $80,000 worth of Chicago Cubs tickets with organizational funds, charged over $440,000 in personal expenses to St. Francis credit cards, left the organization operating without a chief financial officer, sometimes needing loans just to make weekly payroll. In November 2022, Smith and the organization's former IT director were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. They're accused of stealing at least $4.7 million, money that was meant to provide services to foster children. Meanwhile, the actual work of protecting children was suffering. Data from 2021 showed that 42% of St. Francis caseworkers were handling more than 30 children each, well above the maximum recommended caseload. Over 100 children had no assigned caseworker at all. In Nebraska, St. Francis's contract was terminated after regulators found they had failed to provide required medical records for children, complete background checks on foster parents, document monthly welfare visits, create service delivery plans. The connection is clear. While St. Francis Ministries was imploding financially, while executives were embezzling millions, while caseworkers were drowning under impossible caseloads, vulnerable children were falling through the cracks. And some of them, like Natalie, were dying. Child welfare experts said, adequate oversight requires reasonable caseloads, regular in-person visits, and caseworkers who have time to look beyond what they're being told by foster parents. When organizations are in financial chaos and workers are overwhelmed, children become invisible, red flags get missed, abuse goes undetected. The Natalie Garcia case is a tragic example of what happens when the system meant to protect children is itself broken. In August 2025, facing overwhelming evidence, Christina Schroer entered a plea of no contest. This meant she didn't admit guilt, but also didn't contest the charges. The original first-degree murder charge was reduced to second-degree murder as part of a negotiated plea agreement. She also pleaded no contest to child abuse, making false information, and theft. November 10, 2025. The sentencing hearing in Butler County District Court was emotional, difficult, and necessary. Judge Jan Satterfield, an experienced jurist who had seen countless cases, had to pause multiple times during the proceedings to gather herself. At times, she was seen wiping tears as she described the suffering these children had endured. Natalie's biological mother, Krista Helm, spoke directly to the court. Her words were heartbreaking. Natalie's older sister, Haley Wilson, also spoke. The biological grandmother spoke, all of them pleading for maximum penalties, all of them struggling to understand how someone could do this to a child. In a powerful moment, Rose Hill Police Chief Taylor Parlier brought a visual aid to the courthouse, a replica of the box Natalie had been forced into, complete with the blankets and crib that had been piled on top. Next to it, he placed a doll that matched Natalie's height and weight. He wanted everyone to see, to truly visualize what had been done to this little girl. Christina's statement to the court was brief and emotionless. She apologized to her family, her friends, and the community for any heartache this has caused them. Notably absent any apology to Natalie's family, any acknowledgement of what she'd done to Natalie herself. She also claimed, despite significant evidence to the contrary, that her husband knew nothing about this. Judge Satterfield was not moved. In delivering her sentence, she said, "The sentence, 15 months in prison, just under 18 years. It was the maximum allowed under the plea agreement. Christina must serve a minimum of 185 months, more than 15 years, before she's eligible for parole." Joseph Schroer, who pleaded no contest to aggravated child endangerment and Medicaid fraud, is scheduled for sentencing on December 3, 2025. He faces additional prison time for his role in enabling this abuse. Butler County Attorney Darren DeVinny noted that this sentence, while the maximum available, feels inadequate given the magnitude of the crime. Police Chief Parlier echoed this sentiment, saying, "This is nowhere near a high enough price for her torturous killing of Natalie Garcia." But this was the justice the system could provide. And for Natalie's family, it was something: acknowledgement, accountability, and the certainty that Christina Schroer would spend years behind bars. This story isn't over for the children who survived. The girls who lived through this nightmare are now safe, removed from the Schroer home and receiving comprehensive care. Butler County Attorney Darren Devaney spoke about the support being provided. They're receiving anything and everything that they possibly need, not just to get over the trauma of what went on at the Schroer home, but also we want them to be safe, stable, productive, and give them some permanency as well, so they can lead, hopefully, a productive life. The physical recovery will take time, relearning what normal eating looks like, gaining healthy weight, addressing medical neglect. But the psychological recovery will take even longer. Krista Helm, Natalie's biological mother, is fighting to regain custody of her 2 surviving daughters who were also adopted by the Schroers. She's working with attorneys, going through the legal process, determined to bring her girls home. One of the most heartbreaking aspects, the sister who witnessed Natalie's death will carry that trauma for the rest of her life. She showed incredible courage in ultimately telling the truth, courage that led to justice for her sister. But no child should ever have to carry that burden. If there's any meaning to be found in this tragedy, it's in the lessons we can learn, the warning signs we must not ignore. Whether you're a family member, a neighbor, a teacher, or a concerned citizen, these red flags should always prompt questions. Child abuse thrives in isolation and silence. It happens behind closed doors because abusers are skilled at presenting a normal facade to the outside world. Christina Schroer fooled neighbors, extended family, and even law enforcement for years. But there were people who suspected something was wrong. The child who ran away and tried to report the abuse in 2021 knew. Some family members felt something was off, but couldn't quite articulate it. The anonymous reporter who contacted DCF in August 2024 knew. Trust those instincts. Report those concerns. You might be the only person willing to look beyond the facade. If you're watching this video and you suspect a child is being abused, please report it. You can call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in more than 170 languages. All calls are free and confidential. If you believe a child is in immediate danger, call 911. For the system to work, we need adequate funding, manageable caseloads for social workers, regular in-person wellness checks, and accountability for organizations that fail to meet standards. Contact your legislators. Support organizations working on foster care reform. Demand better. We remember Natalie. We honor her memory by protecting others. We learn from this tragedy so that no other child suffers the same fate. Every child deserves safety. Every child deserves love. Every child deserves protection. Natalie Marie Garcia should be 11 years old right now. She should be in 5th grade, discovering her interests, making friends, planning for her future. She should have had birthdays and holidays and all the ordinary precious moments of childhood. Instead, she's gone, taken far too soon by someone who was supposed to protect her. Rose Hill Police Chief Taylor Parlier spoke for many when he said, "I will never forgive myself for what occurred. Just a block and a half away from my office, a child was placed into the cold earth." This case should spark change in how we fund and monitor foster care agencies, in how we train and support social workers, in how we respond when children try to tell us they're in danger. We remember you, Natalie, your smile, your joy, your infectious spirit. We're so sorry we couldn't protect you, but we promise your story will help protect others. Rest in peace, sweet girl.